those empty tea bags and fill it up with whatever they want. This is just what makes it is. You need sleep. It's all in your head.
We are talking Nightshade, also known as Black Nightshade. This is directed by Landon Williams and stars Lou Ferrigno Jr. as a police detective who was like kind of our main character. You've also got supporting roles from Dina Meyer, who you may know from Starship Troopers, and Jason Patric as a character called Randy Bell. Jesus Christ. I mean... Anyway, so this kind of purports to be like a horror film, at least by the kind of the art, poster art, and the kind of the, certainly even the beginning of the movie. But this really isn't a horror film, to be honest with you. There is a very light sprinkling of the kind of the paranormal here, but it is more a thriller kind of drama movie than anything else. So the focus of the story, as I say, is this character played by Lou Ferrigno Jr., obviously son of Lou Ferrigno. And he's this detective who is suffering from sleep deprivation, insomnia, and he's having these kind of like these weird kind of waking dreams. He's going to see a kind of a therapist who's trying to kind of find out the reason for him having all of these problems. He's investigating a kind of a string of murders. His wife is suffering from depression through losing their child, and you know, it's all kind of a little bit too much for him. Now, as the movie kind of goes on, we see the kind of the psychological problems that this kind of guy is having, and there may well be a connection to this series of murders that is happening across town. And as I said, there is a kind of a touch of the paranormal here, but it's very, very minor. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works with Nightshade. Okay, so Nightshade, the most memorable thing about this movie for me was its absolutely kick-ass soundtrack, and I'm talking about the kind of the more of the just the actual themes and things like this. I'm not normally one to kind of really make note of soundtracks. To me, they're always kind of a perfectly good soundtrack complements a movie, but I never really notice it. In this particular movie, this one really does elevate some scenes. There are some kind of like somewhat kind of trippy scenes here, where this kind of guy is dreaming or hallucinating, and the actual soundtrack here really does emphasise and give it a somewhat of a kind of otherworldly feel. So to me, the soundtrack here is, I think, certainly one of the strongest elements of this movie. But it really does elevate the material, I find. I actually quite liked some of the characters within this kind of film. I thought the characterizations, even in minor kind of players, like for example, Lou Ferrigno Jr.'s partner, for example, I thought, well, kind of well realised, likeable kind of characters, and you've got kind of a good sense of who they are. So to me, some of the character work for some of these kind of these people was pretty good. And there is an intriguing mystery that does make sense when you kind of get to the film as a whole. You finish the movie, everything kind of makes sense. However, put a pin in that because we are going to come back to that point. So there is actually quite an intriguing story here. And as I say, there is kind of elements of the sort of the supernatural here, albeit, as I say, relatively kind of light. And yeah, it's somewhat of an enthralling mystery, I personally think. To kind of like, you kind of want to find out where it's kind of going and what's actually going to happen and people's kind of connections to each other and things like that. The acting is a little bit of a mixed bag, if I'm honest. I would say it's 70% of the time is pretty good. Again, put a pin in that. But nonetheless, I think it's a professionally kind of shot film. I think it's, you know, quite well kind of made in regards to its directorial kind of choices and kind of like artistic kind of flourishes. As I said, I think there's a good use of some of the kind of the video effects in regards to depicting kind of like how this guy is having problems sleeping and the kind of the visions that he's having and things like that. Even though this is not an effects heavy movie, I'm talking more of just the kind of like the kind of like the way this is filmed and kind of camera trickery and stuff to really kind of like emphasize this kind of somewhat kind of dreamlike state that this kind of character is in a lot of the times. I actually thought it was kind of quite effective here. So what doesn't work for me in this movie? Okay, this is not really a criticism, but I feel this movie may be criticised for it, if that makes sense. Now, we've talked about this. I've talked about the story, how I do think it's quite an interesting story, and it does make sense once you get to the end. However, I think getting there may be a problem for some people, because this is one of these films that just seems like a convoluted mess of a film until certain reveals happen. And although the movie does make sense as a whole, I can see people just kind of turning off this movie and thinking, I don't know what the hell's going on. Now, that's obviously a choice by the filmmakers here to, you know, keep the viewers in the dark. But I feel it doesn't maybe give enough breadcrumbs to really, to kind of like, for viewers maybe to follow, and seems like a bit of a jumble. Now, I'm not a huge fan of like lots of kind of flashbacks and dream sequences and kind of fake outs and things like that. And this is one of these movies, because we know it's to do with kind of sleep conditions and stuff. I'm thinking, is this going to be a dream sequence? Is this going to? Are we just going to have like this thing where he's going to wake up and it's going to be a dream? And the problem is with this movie is there are kind of sequences that kind of hint that may be the case. But so you never really kind of trust. You're thinking, I don't really know. I don't really know what I'm kind of watching here. And although I think once we get to the kind of the last act of the movie, I think it does a good job of kind of filling in those gaps, and kind of it does make a coherent story. I can understand people not clinging on to that for the whole ride, because the movie kind of seems somewhat convoluted up until that point. To me, if you want to have a good mystery, you certainly can have some questions and not answer straight away. But I think, you know, you need to take the viewers with you, and I think this movie maybe will lose some people along the journey here, although albeit you'll get, if you can stick it out, you know, everything is kind of revealed here and does kind of make more or less sense, although there are still a couple of things that I have questions on, but for the most part I think will be satisfactory, but it's just getting to that point. So let's talk about the cast. Okay, this movie purports to have Jason Patric as Randy Bell. Maybe he's an ex-porn star, I don't know. He is literally in one very brief scene at the beginning of the movie. Don't be expecting a lot of Jason Patric. I also think, I gotta say, it's a little bit of a cheat even having his name on there. This literally looks like about an hour's work for Jason Patric. It really is a fleeting appearance. Even Dina Meyer doesn't get a huge amount of screen time as well. The main star of the show is, as I say, Lou Ferrigno Jr. And I kind of mentioned I think the acting was about 70% good most of the time. And that's true of this guy, because I think for there are sequences that I think are you know, well done. But there are sequences here from this guy and the character of his wife on screen where I felt in some sequences were a little poorer. With his wife specifically on the third act, she kind of really kind of hams it up in the third act of the movie, whilst I think she was perfectly fine in the rest of the kind of the movie. Now she seemed kind of quite a sweet person. Then she just like turned the cheese level up towards the end. And for Lou Ferrigno Jr., there's just some sequences where I felt his line delivery was kind of somewhat kind of stilted. So the acting is kind of, for the most part, okay. There are once or twice where I just felt it kind of slips here and there. There are some things here that to me were introduced and nothing was done with them. So the beginning of the movie, which features Jason Patric as Randy Bell, we have this imagery of this kind of pentagram and some type of kind of ritual that's going on. Never really mentioned again what's going on there. I think, oh cool, it's some type of like, you know, sacrifice, or it's some type of, you know, ritual that's kind of going on. You know, demonic worship, and it all looks kind of cool imagery. Nah, it never is mentioned again about what is actually going on in that kind of sequence. And I'm thinking, is this kind of like, and it's the same thing with the sleeve in the poster art. of this movie. It makes it kind of feel like this is going to be a kind of supernatural, demonic sort of possession movie or worship movie or something like that. It really isn't. It really isn't. It's a bit of a bait and switch. And then we got to talk about the actual, without kind of spoiling anything, the actual supernatural element that it does introduce. So a character, we learn, has some abilities. But there is a kind of something that happens with this particular character that is revealed, and they have this kind of reacted to something that happens, and it's just like this kind of reaction feels really false to me, because there's nothing to suggest this person is kind of would have such a callous reaction. That's the best way I can put it. A particular character has a very callous reaction to something that happens, and it doesn't make sense in context of the film that we have presented to us. And that prior to this point, there's no indication that this person would be as callous. That's all I'll say, without kind of spoiling anything here. So I think there is the basic idea of the movie having this kind of like this weaving kind of like mystery about what's kind of going on. I think when it's all said and done, it kind of gets there for the most part, but along the way, I think it doesn't really do a good job of taking the viewer with you, and then some of the points with the movie, it feels like it just kind of ignores. So what can we say? Should you watch this movie? I think it still is a fairly proficient movie. I think this movie has an interesting idea. If you kind of like serial killers, mysteries, a little bit of supernatural drama, it does have an enjoyable premise. I thought it was well shot. The biggest thing for me, as I say, is the soundtrack and the interesting directorial choices by Landon Williams here. They to me kind of make the most interesting elements here. I think the poorest element is maybe the writing. Anyway, for me it's a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.